How are you doing, Liz? Congratulations. I saw you had a couple closings last month up in St. Helena, so well done. I want to start with some market condition things and then get into forms. So I read this quote the other day. Everyone's wondering what's coming for the housing market as we head into the holidays. Things are changing fast, and we've never seen anything quite like it. But one thing we know is for sure is the agents that are winning right now are those who offer clarity on what buyers and sellers should expect. They explain what's really happening in the market, dispel fear, and win more listings because of it. So clarity. This was attached to a webinar the other day, and I'm going to share some slides with you from that webinar. But a couple of the illustrations in the slides are, well, this is all to address Uncle Charlie. Uncle Charlie is the guy who comes to Thanksgiving dinner and says, oh, the real estate market is crashing. I'm going to, wait until all the prices fall and buy a property next year, and it's going to be just like 2008. Well, that's what Uncle Charlie believes, and it's hard to dissuade him of that position. In fact, 23% of the population in the country expect values to fall, in real estate values to fall. So there's a lot of Uncle Charlies out there. So how do we talk to Uncle Charlie? Well, values are not depreciating. The appreciation level of real estate values is falling. So whereas we've had a strong appreciation rate, particularly through the 2020, 2021, 22, until mid 22 when interest rates went up. And then the appreciation rate started to fall, but it's still positive. And one of these slides illustrates that. So values are not depreciating, the rate of appreciation is falling, but there is still appreciation in real estate. So let me go to these slides here. This is a 49-year average monthly price movement by month over month, so for 1973 to 22. So all of them over the 40.
We're not seeing it.
Oh, okay.
We're just seeing the list.
Okay, let me stop share and then reshare. Thank you, Shannon. Yeah. Okay, now can you see the graph?
Yes.
Thanks, Sharon.
Okay.
Sometimes the sharing on Zoom is a little cumbersome. So this is by month, so January through to December, and you can see in the months, the winter months, the appreciation in real estate is lower because there's fewer sales, and those sales are taking place in not the peak market for selling a home necessarily, but the homes still are selling, and over the 43 years, there's been appreciation in all of the months. Of course, the hot months, as we know, are March through August, particularly March through May, in the spring market. And this is a national graph, so it varies from area to area, but I think it holds pretty true. So let me move that slide and go to this one, and I may have to stop share again. Can you see this second slide?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. So, there's a question whether the economy is going to have a recession, or if it's had a recession. We aren't, really quite certain. But even if the economy were to slip into recession, over the past 5 recessions, going to 1980, 81, 91, 2001, 2008, 2020, and only 4 out of those 6 years, and that's 6, 4 out of those 6 years, there was still appreciation in the housing market despite the recession. So, and obviously this big red blob here was 2008. And that recession was caused by the financial markets, funny loans, bad mortgages, things like that. So even if the economy were to go, someone says, well, the economy is going to go into a recession. Well, that doesn't mean real estate value is going to fall, because historically they haven't fallen in all the recessions. Okay. Let me close that graph and show you the third one. All right, so this, we are at an all-time low for foreclosures. And that even includes the pandemic period when there was a moratorium on foreclosures. There's only going to be it's estimated that in 2023, this year, there will be 124,000 foreclosures. You can see back in 2008 or 9 and 10, there were 2.9 million, 2.8 million, 2.9 million, 2.3 million. So this is an all-time low on foreclosures. So foreclosures are, something that would cause values to fall, because the lenders who own have foreclosed on the property are selling them at reduced prices. But we aren't going to have that, because there aren't that many foreclosures. In addition to this, so you can tell Uncle Charlie, not only it's a record low in foreclosure filings, it's the lowest delinquency rate on loans ever. So the banks report delinquencies, and the rate is very, very low on any loan delinquencies. So those indicators are just not going to lead to a drastic falling of values. Let's stop and share that. All right, I'm going to open up the next slide.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yes, please.
So just to try to help me make sure I'm understanding. So basically right now, because of there's different forces that will cause a market to like cool down and then stop and then basically go into reverse. And so you're talking about, so as long as appreciation is happening, there's still forward movement. People's homes are still increasing in value from the price they bought them from. And we haven't gone into like a negative situation where now people's houses are worth less than what they paid for them. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Now, every circumstance is individual. So if someone bought their home at the peak of the market in 2021, say, when things were hot and heavy, the value of that home may have decreased.
Okay.
That individual home, you'll figure that out in your CMA.
Okay.
But the overall stock of housing has continued to appreciate. Now, I'll show you a chart on that in a minute. And I'm going to share these charts with you when I send out the recording They're good to have, and actually, if you download them to the phone, you can show Uncle Charlie at dinner. You can show him these charts. But anyway, so this is estimated home price performance as forecasted by different agencies. So it's expected on a national basis, 2023 is going to be 3.3% appreciation. Some folks are saying it's around 2%. Whatever, it's an appreciation. 2024 is going to be a little softer, perhaps, in terms of appreciation rate, 2%, and then 25, 3%, 26, 3%, and 27, 4%. So those are reasonable numbers, and it will take this next chart. I'm going to go back and do this exercise. This one shows the percentage of annual home appreciation, seasonally adjusted and rounded to the nearest full number. So only since 1980, only in that period of 2008 to 2010 were there's a recession, a decrease in the appreciation, as you would say, a depreciated real estate values during that time, and actually it reached about 20% by the end of that period, from the year 2007. But since then, it's been positive, and it's expected to continue to be that way. What's that again?
Can I, so what you were saying before is basically if someone buys when the market is hot and pays a lot, and then they expect then unlimited appreciation to continuing to happen, are going to be the folks that get the most upset right now when there's like a slight cooling effect.
Yeah, if they had to sell right now, and they may not recover their costs, particularly since there's costs to the sale. There's 6% commissions to pay,
Right.
and things like that. So even if their home went up 2%, and then they've got to pay a 6% commission, they may not come out whole. But usually a person, unless you're flipping a home or something.
That's what I was going to say. Like this could be just affecting like certain types of investors.
Yeah.
From like they're upset the most, and just understanding that like certain groups of people are being affected in a negative way, but like overall it's not negative for everyone. That's
exactly correct. So these are the 2023 year-end home price forecast from Fannie Mae, AEI, Zillow, HBES, MBA, and NAR. They average 3.9%. This is a forecast for the 23 year-end. I don't think it'll be as high as 3.9, but myself, but it's all of them are predicting some appreciation in 2023, despite the bad news you hear in the newspapers and stuff like that. And then let's see, I think I'm down to the last slide here. Okay, let me go here. And this is, again, the, no, I already shared that one. Hold on a second. Sorry. Yeah. I got to stop this again. Okay. This is the net worth of individuals or homeowners versus individuals who are renters. Back in 2010, the net worth of homeowners was $187,000 compared to $5,400 for a renter. Looking at the 2022, this gap has gotten larger. The homeowner has a $396,000 net worth, and the average renter has a $10,400. So there's a pay to own a home. Yeah, it's an increasingly paying to own a home versus renting a home. So it's also a good chart to be farming renters who might want to buy a home, and our job is to help them see how they can get qualified to acquire a home. So those are a few charts that I'll send along, and we'll give you background and clarity that you can speak to Uncle Charlie, who's saying the market's falling to pieces, because there's a lot of statistics that indicate a continuing strong market. And one of the things that we are looking at is increased sales numbers. I think, was there a chart there? Hold on a second. Let me just look for a second. Was one of those? Oh, one of them was prices. I'm not sure. It must have been another presentation, but the number of home sales for this year, 2023, is going to be the lowest in quite a while. Under 4 million homes nationally, when the average is up above 8, I think. So they are expecting that number of sales to rebound to over 5 million next year. So we expect to see an increased number of sales, which is going to be good for us because we're in the business of doing sales. Okay. Any questions on those slides? You see the one comment in the chat. Last time I looked at Knapp County home appreciated over a long period. Best memory was about 8%. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Curtis, you're correct. So I think our local appreciation has been higher than the national average in general. Okay. Want to talk about compensation. Now, remember, we as real estate agents can't discuss compensation with other agents that not in our brokerage, but within our brokerage, we can discuss compensation as much as we want. And we certainly need to discuss compensation with our clients, because these lawsuits that we're hearing about all stem from the fact that the client says, I didn't understand how much I was paying, and so forth. So they're claiming they don't understand how we get paid and how much we get paid and who pays it. So a lot of the remedies coming out about how we avoid these lawsuits are around disclosing and being clear about how we get paid as agents and how much and by whom. So we're going to start with the RPA. The residential purchase agreement. Close this thing here. Oops, I'm going to move this over here. Okay. Why is that sliding down?
Gary, you're on mute. Can you check? You're on mute. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I don't know how I hit that. Thank you, Misty. People have to speak up when things aren't going right. You can't see what I'm talking about, or you can't hear me talking. So anyway, we're on page 3 of the RPA, or 2 of the RPA, and it's paragraph 3G3 that says the seller agrees to pay the obligation to the buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. Seller's broker offer, if any, to compensate buyer's broker is unaffected unless otherwise agreed. And this would be only if you have a buyer broker agreement, buyer representation agreement with your client, and you're expecting the seller to pay that obligation. So you would check that box. Otherwise, you don't check that box. If it's a normal sale where the selling broker, the listing agent, is offering compensation to the buyer's agent, and we don't have a buyer broker agreement, you just ignore that clause. Now let's look at paragraph 18 where it talks about compensation. Brokers and agents. Now you remember, we are not buyers, agents and brokers are not a party to this contract. So the agreements to be paid by either the buyer or the seller are separate agreements between the broker and that party. But this RPA, which is an agreement between the seller and the buyer, does have this paragraph on compensation. And it says seller or buyer or both, as applicable, agree to pay the compensation to the broker as specified in a separate written agreement between the broker and that seller or buyer. Compensation is payable upon close of escrow, or if escrow does not close, as otherwise specified in the agreement between broker and the seller or buyer. If seller agrees to pay buyer's broker, as indicated in paragraph 3G3, seller shall be entitled to a copy of the written portion of the compensation agreement between the buyer and the buyer's broker, identifying the compensation to be paid. So that is the BRBC, which we've been referring to, and it contains the amount, if we're representing a buyer, that the buyer would pay us unless we get paid by the seller. That's how that works. So that's what it says about compensation. Any questions on that? All right. Let's go back here and find the form, the aforementioned form, the SPBB. Now this form, well, it'll be clear when we start talking about it. Can you see the seller payment buyer broker form, or do I need to restart that?
We can see it.
Okay, great. So the seller payment to buyer's broker is the SPBB, and it says the following terms or conditions are hereby incorporated and made a part of the purchase agreement. And it describes the property and the parties, as so all these forms do. And these are the instructions. You only use this form if, and there's 3 ifs here. Only use this form if the buyer and the buyer's agent have already entered into a buyer's representation agreement, form BRBC. Now, it's very likely that the industry standard of practice is going to be for all agents to have a BRBC with their buyer clients. Our company is exploring the requirement, the policy, that all our agents would have a BRBC with their buyer clients. And it's likely that we'll have that out in the next couple of weeks. So you really need to become familiar with the BRBC and how to use it, because you're going to be explaining it to your buyers. Okay, so now we have a BRBC. We meet condition 1 there. And condition 2, Buyer has an obligation to pay the buyer's broker compensation pursuant to the representation agreement after first deducting any amount that the buyer's broker will be receiving from the seller's broker through the MLS or other. So that would be in filling out the BRBC. It would state that the buyer pays us this amount unless we're paid by the listing agent or the seller, and then the buyer does not owe us that commission directly. It's being paid by the third party. And 3, the buyer is asking seller to pay the buyer's broker all or a portion of the balance due the buyer's broker under the representation agreement. And this amount shall be entered in paragraph 3. So if those 3 conditions that were, we've got our BRBC, we go to a listing, the listing is offering, continues to offer the buyer's agent, the CSO in the MLS is offered there at some percentage. And that is condition 3, that the buyer is asking the seller to pay the buyer's broker. Now, this also means that if the buyer-broker agreement, compensation agreement, calls for, let's say, 3%, and the listing agent is offering 2.5%, then the buyer is going to ask the seller to pay the other portion, the balance due under the buyer-broker agreement. So that other 0.5%. So that's how this form starts and how it works. The seller may accept or reject or counter this term as with any other term in the buyer's offer. So we no longer need to use that CA form, the commission agreement form with the seller. We just use this form because it becomes something that the seller can accept, reject, or counter. And it spells out what we're expecting the seller to pay. And then it states what we all know, and that real estate commissions are not fixed by law. Each broker, they're set by each broker individually and may be negotiable. I attended Jeremy Olson's webinar meeting the other day for brokers and managers. And he says, we need to talk about commissions. His comment was, we need to talk about commissions with our clients. And the things we need to say are A, commissions are negotiable. B, commissions are negotiable. C, commissions are negotiable. So we really need to make it clear, and this form does, that commissions are negotiable. Now, the buyer, under number 1 here now, buyer representation agreement with compensation. Buyer has entered into a written agreement to compensate the buyer's broker blank percent. So whatever we put in the BRBC goes in here. So if we put in 3% in the BRBC, we put in 3% here. 2, compensation from the seller's broker to the buyer's broker. As of the date, this seller payment for buyer's broker document is signed, and pursuant to the MLS, seller's broker has agreed to pay the buyer's broker blank. So that's putting in what is offered through the MLS. It might be 3%, which matches this 3%. It might be 2.5%, which is lower than this percent. We might have 2.5%, and this is maybe they're offering 3%. So both numbers are entered, the number in our BRBC and the number in the CSO that the listing agent is offering the buyer's agent. Seller payment to buyer's broker shall not be greater than the amount in paragraph 1 minus the amount in paragraph 2. So if paragraph 1 says 3 and this says 2.5, then the seller payment shall not be more than 1/2. That would go in here. If they're equal, then there would be 0% there. And if they're different, in the opposite direction, it would still be 0 because it can't be more than the amount up here in the BRBC. Okay, so all these things are spelled out clearly, but it takes a little while to understand them if you haven't used the form before. Buyer author, number 4, buyer authorizes escrow agent upon request to deliver to the seller a copy of the portion of the written agreement between the buyer broker and the buyer and the buyer's broker identifying the amount of compensation. So we deliver page 1 of the BRBC, which says the amount which we filled in here at number 1. And if the buyer's broker is the same as the seller broker, then the amount specified in the MLS shall apply in the manner specified in paragraphs 2 and 3. Additionally, if broker has agreed to a listing agreement to reduce commission in the event of dual agency, the amount of the compensation specified in the MLS will still apply to offset the compensation the buyer has agreed to pay buyer's broker. Okay. Now, my guess is that if we've agreed in our BRBC that the buyer is going to pay us 2.5%, and the listing agreement and the CSO and the MLS says it's going to be 3%, that we're going to accept the 2.5%, and we aren't going to expect that other 0.5%. That's just a kind of practice which I think will evolve over time. That is this form that gets used if we have a buyer brokerage agreement, which we are going to have generally with all our buyers, and we're submitting an offer, that we would submit this form at the same time. Okay, I'm going to go back to stop share here and see if there's any questions. There's something in the chat. Let me see. Oh, yeah, just telling me I'm on mute. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, let's go on to the ABCD form. And this is a form, actually, I wasn't familiar with it until last week. It's the anticipated broker compensation disclosure, ABCD. So it says we, the buyer and brokers, and we're representing this buyer. Broker anticipates receiving compensation from seller or the seller's broker if the buyer purchases any properties, any of the properties below. Compensation will be paid pursuant to the multiple listing service offer, a cooperating broker compensation agreement, or other source specified in the column below. Buyer is aware that any commission paid by the seller directly or indirectly through the seller's broker affects the seller's total costs and expenses for the transaction and may impact the price the seller is willing to accept. If for a specified property, broker has provided the buyer with a copy of the document from the MLS that identifies the compensation offered to a cooperating broker for a listed property, that property may, but does not have to be listed below. Broker independently or through escrow will disclose the final compensation broker received from anyone other than the buyer. So, this form, let's see, the next confirmation here is buyer acknowledges that the buyer has read, understands, received a copy of this anticipated broker compensation disclosure by initialing the box below. Buyer acknowledges being advised by the broker's anticipated compensation for the property identified. So this is basically to tell the buyer what we're going to be paid by the seller, because that's what these lawsuits are about. It's like, well, I didn't know, you were being paid, what you were being paid. You never told me. So this section is to be filled out when the property is being shown or when an offer is made. So you can do it at either time. If you're showing 4 or 5 properties, you might list 4 or 5 here and put in the dates you showed the property and the commission rates on each one. And typically they're going to be paid through the MLS. And if not through the MLS, the CBC, the Commission Broker Compensation Agreement. So that's kind of disclosing up front what the offer of compensation is for this particular property and who's going to pay it. So that's disclosing to the buyer what we're going to get paid, basically. The final, then this section will be completed upon close of escrow when the final compensation is determined. The final compensation from persons other than the buyer, buyers, brokers receive compensation for buyer's purchase property located at property address from the seller's broker in the amount of blank. And then everybody signs it. So it's again a new disclosure from what we've used in the past. Again, we need to practice it, get used to it, and start using it. Any questions on that one? Now,
I actually have a question, Gary.
sure, Misty.
In regards to the ABCD and the BRBC, would those be companions, or is the ABCD just a disclosure, whereas the BRBC is the actual agreement?
Yes, that's correct. The ABCD is just a disclosure.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's to get over the hump of people claiming that we never disclosed to them what we were going to get paid.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so it accompanies the BRBC.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Well, you would prepare it separately as you show properties. I think what you would do is explain to your buyer, as you're, explaining the BRBC, that as we go see properties, I'm going to tell you from, what the offer of compensation is in each of the properties we look at.
Okay.
If there's a zero compensation, because the seller, decides and the listing agents decide that they don't want to offer the buyer's agent compensation, then we'll make an offer that's subject to, we'll use the CBC, and we'll make an offer subject to the seller paying the fee.
Okay. That's great. It's just doing all the homework up front and being very candid.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering that.
Sure. Now there's a form that is designed to help us. Let me see. Explain this to understand it ourselves and explain it to our clients. And it's called the Quick Guide to Buyer Representation Agreements, how they work for you. Why should a realtor use a buyer representation agreement? Why would a buyer agree to sign a buyer representation agreement? What types of buyer representation agreements are available? We referenced the BRBC and a BTA. I don't know what the BTA is. And the ABCD, a bunch of different forms. There's a new one called the Notice of Buyer Broker Involved in Properties. So if we have a BRBC and we've shown properties, then we would write them out on this disclosure, NBIP, and everybody would know that we were the ones who showed that property. And if the buyer buys it, we would likely be the procuring cause. What should be emphasized to the buyer when presenting the buyer representation forms? Now, this second one here that's highlighted, I think is worded poorly, and I passed it on to Bill Jansen, our legal counsel, and asked him to pass it on to CAR so it could be amended. Because what it says is any compensation offered by the seller broker is credited against the buyer's obligation to pay. The buyer may not have to pay anything at all for the broker's services. Well, that's like saying exactly what we're not supposed to say, and that is that, well, our services are for free. We're being paid by the seller. Well, they aren't being paid by the seller, really, because nobody gets paid unless the buyer puts up the money to purchase the properties. So the buyer is basically, even though it's coming out of the seller's escrow statement and the seller's proceeds, the buyer is making that possible. So you can't say that the buyer will not have to pay anything for the broker services. So I think that needs to be changed, and until it's changed, and if you're using this form as a handout to your buyer about, these are reasons why we're using this form, which is okay. Jeremy Olson, the legal counsel for Norbar, encouraged that actually. Said, give them the form, the BRBC, to look over, explain it, go over the quick guide with them, and then go over the Q&A on the BRBC. Okay. The NPIP. No, I wouldn't fill it out every time. The question was, should we be filling out the properties that we've shown and have that signed by the buyer every time? No, but I would certainly keep a list. It's kind of like that clause in the listing agreement that if you reach the end of your agreement and you have an exclusion period, 45 days, 30 days, whatever you put in there, that if the seller sells the property to any of these parties that looked at it while you were the listing agent, then you get compensated and you have to give them a list. It's kind of like that. You do it at the end when necessary, but it's not necessary to do as you move along. Okay, I got one more thing to cover in this area, and we're going to go to the NAR web or the CAR website. Okay. All right. So now we're on the CAR homepage. Okay. If you have questions about, or get a question from Uncle Charlie about the lawsuits, Sitzer Burnett lawsuit, antitrust lawsuit, appeal and potential impacts, there's a button there, right there, that's flashing. You can check on that, and it'll take you to an explanation. If you want to get to the Q&A for the BRBC, and I think it's good to read it, and again, potentially share it with your client, we go under search here, we go to the legal Q&As, and then under this first tab here, we hit this button that we want to look at the legal Q&As. And then we go down, the Q&As are listed by a category. And this one is under contracts and forms, and it's here, buyer, broker representation, and broker compensation agreement. So the Q&A, it's about 5 pages long, and it goes into all the details about that BRBC. So read it, understand it, give it to your client if you want to, and it's a good form. Now, CAR is also offering training on the BRBC, which is free. The way you get to that is go up to the shopping cart here. Click on the shopping cart. And the first thing it says, free course buyer representation forms. So it explains all these buyer representation forms that I've been discussing. If you sign up before December 31st, it's free and you have access to it for 1 year from the sign up date. So go sign up for it and get it. You put in the code free25 when you check out of the store, and you'll have access to the course, and you can watch it at your leisure, and so you understand. Okay. I think that's it for the BRBC today. Is everyone sufficiently confused? Oh, okay, Shannon says it's helpful. That's good. But yeah, get used to using that form because like I say, I think within a couple of weeks, we're going to set it as a company policy that you at least attempt to get that form signed by all of our buyers. And I think over time, it'll become a custom for all. It'll be, like I said, it'll be a standard of practice in the industry that all buyer brokers, or all agents representing buyers have the BRBC as part of their package. Okay. Moving on to things that happened this week. I really just one kind of interesting thing came up this week. That is, we are representing the seller of a property who is a trustee of an estate. There's no probate. They're just the appointed trustee. The trustee, there is an attorney for the estate. I don't know if but the trustee was identified in the proper documents that of the deceased, so they are the trustee authorized to sell the property. There are like 12 beneficiaries. So of the trust, but not the trustee is not one of the beneficiaries. So we were the property's kind of getting prepared to be sold. It was put on the market. There was a deadline for making offers. We got 4 offers. And about that time, as the offers were coming in, the attorney for the trust said to the trustee, well, you need to get signatures from all of the beneficiaries of any offer you want to accept, so that all the beneficiaries have basically signed off on the contract, approving it. Well, this was cumbersome because you got to go out and get 12 people to sign send them all the documents and a form to sign off. The title company, we explored it with the title company, and the title company said, no, that's not really a requirement. Under that trust, they read the trust, their attorneys read the trust, said the trustee has full authority to sell the property without the authorization or approval of the beneficiaries. However, the trustee was concerned that the attorney was going to kind of put her in hot water. So she agreed to go get the signatures anyway, even though we believe it wasn't legally required. The attorney for the trust was quoting a probate language that a statute under the probate law that does require that. They said that it applies in this case, even though it wasn't a probate, and the title company disputed that. So, but anyway, she agreed to do it. So now we kind of we got to condition the approvals of the selected offer with a counter offer that says this is subject to acceptance by the beneficiaries of the trust. And we don't know exactly how long that's going to take. So the trustee knows the 12 beneficiaries and believes that 11 of them could sign off on this thing right away. But the 12th one is a problem. Difficult to get hold of, maybe has some mental issues, drug issues, and they aren't certain they can get that 12th person signature and agreement in a timely way. So one of the offers was actually someone got in a 1031 exchange, and they have a deadlines, of course, to identify and close on their properties. So we had to disclose this to all the offers, that made offers, and see if they wanted to continue if that condition was one of the conditions of the sale, with the counter offer. The last I heard, and this all went down yesterday, actually, the buyer party with the 1031 exchange was a little concerned about that, and they may just back out because of that clause. We haven't. There were other offers that were as good, but I haven't heard yet whether some of the other parties agreed to that clause. So it's interesting. If you are dealing with trust as a client, do pass the trust documents on to the title company first thing and have them give an opinion about what requirements there are about selling the property. It's like when sometimes we have a power of attorney, or the party we're dealing with has a power of attorney to represent the property for sale. But the title company, if the party is alive, that who has issued the power of attorney, the title company will require that party who gave the power of attorney to sign on the deed, unless they're incapacitated legally. So, someone might be gravely ill but not incapacitated, give their power of attorney to a child or something. They may go out and list it with us, because the power of attorney authorizes that, but they don't have the capacity to sell it. They're going to have to go back to mom or dad, whoever gave them the power of attorney, and have them sign the deed. So you need to check all those things out when you're working with a trust or a power of attorney or any kind of thing other than individuals who own the property. Okay. Any questions on that? If you look in the chat, Curtis has been very gracious in offering to help folks with the MLS. Now, he's familiar with the Beres system, MLS, and he's not a member of the Humboldt or Lake County MLSs, so isn't familiar with those. But if you are local here, Sonoma, Napa, Mendocino, and have a question about using the MLS, and that's a good tools and tips, give Curtis a call, 707-944-0421, and he's happy to help you. All right, last thing I have is the fall legal update. I've kind of pointed this out a couple of times, and I'll continue to do it until it's a fall legal update. And it's December 4th at 9:30 via Zoom. And they're going to cover legal issues arising out of the current market, war stories, disclosure issues, agent trouble issues, new statutes, new and revised forms. I understand there's 82 changes in the December 10th release that's coming out, new revised forms. DR developments, NAR litigation status report. So there's a lot they're going to cover, and then they also are available to answer questions. This requires a pre-registration, which I will send out that link along with the recording and other announcements that I have make to all of you. So keep an eye out for that and pre-register and block out the time. It's our fall legal update, which are always informative. Okay. That's all I've got today. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Gary. That was very insightful.
Okay, great. Appreciate it. And happy Thanksgiving. We won't have a class next Friday, day after Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the rainfall and be well. Bye, everybody.